Hi, welcome to Hillcrest Sermons, growing together.
Show us your heart's delight.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kijo, Koji, and Mika for reading that for us. I know that was a long story, but I kind of wanted to get the whole story. I think it's important for us. So, my name is Rachel, if you don't know me, and like Tim said, I'm on staff with the college ministry over at Western that Hillcrest partners with, Campus Christian Fellowship. I'm super excited to be here with you all today to talk about Sabbath rest. Something to know about me that I feel like is just the fun fact I always share is that I'm from a really, really big family. So my family, there's 19 kids. So I'm one of them. So I have 18 siblings. And I feel like people would always, like, when they would see my family and the way they would talk to my parents was always very admiring. You know, they would say, oh, your kids, they're so sweet and so well-behaved, and wow, you guys, you're so incredible, my mom and dad, and you must be so patient. And my mom would always just kind of laugh to herself. She's like, man, they have no idea what the reality is like, you know. But I think it's true probably for a lot of us, what things look like from the outside and what they look like from the inside. And my mom and dad actually are amazing. But, of course, it's my responsibility as their daughter to only remember their mistakes so that I can share funny stories about them in settings like this. And I was thinking about, there was a time when we were also all homeschooled. So my mom, there was a particular day where there was just a lot happening. On a normal day, there was a lot happening in my house, but there was more even than usual. And so she was running around. She was a little more stressed than normal. And I remember my sister Margaret, who I think was like 7 or 8 at the time, kept trying to get her attention. I'd be like, Mom. And Mom would say, not right now, Margaret, just give me a minute. I've just got a lot going on. And Margaret would wait a few minutes. And then she would say, hey, Mom. I'm like, just give me a couple minutes, Margaret. And then finally, like the 5th or 6th time, Margaret goes, hey, Mom. And Mom just, she just had a little bit of frustration in her voice, and she turned around, and she was like, okay, what do you need, Margaret? And Margaret just goes, I made you a scone. I was like, oh, Mom felt so bad. And it makes me wonder if any of you have ever had a moment like that where you tried to give someone a gift and they totally missed it. Or maybe you were the one who was meant to be receiving a gift, and you, because you were distracted or had more going on or just weren't in the best mood, the moment just kind of got missed. I feel like as parents, you probably experience this a lot, where you're trying to do something fun for your kids, and they're just, it's just not happening. They just will not let you have this fun moment together, right? And I think that is probably true. We can probably think of some of these moments, like humorous moments in our lives. But I also think it is a good way to think about the situation we find God and his people in the story that we just read, when they experience for the first time the gift of the Sabbath. That story in Exodus 16 is the first time in the Bible that the Sabbath is practiced. That's the first time that God officially kind of invites his people to keep a Sabbath day. And when we get to this chapter, God has already made some really amazing redemptive moves on behalf of his people, right? He's already rescued them from their oppressors in Egypt. He split the Red Sea in half to rescue them. And now, as they're wandering in the wilderness, God is providing for them in the wildest way. He's making food fall out of the sky for them every day. So that's pretty incredible. And all they have to do is go out and gather what they need every day. And he tells them, there's one day that I'm giving you that's going to be different from all the others. And on this day, there will be no miraculous bread from heaven, because on this day, this is a holy day, Sabbath day, and I want you to rest. And God himself calls this day a gift. He says in verse 29, bear in mind that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. I think that's kind of amazing. What an awesome gift. Who wouldn't want a gift like that? a day off every single week. Especially if you're like a people who were recently living as slaves. What an amazing thing God is giving them. Who wouldn't want a gift like that? Well, apparently the people didn't want it. Or at least they really seemed to struggle with it. They struggled to receive it. Over and over again in the chapter that we heard, what do we see them doing? Do we see them celebrating? Thanking God for this amazing gift? Chilling by the pool on the seventh day because they know they don't have to worry? No. What are they doing? They're grumbling. They're complaining. And they go out to gather bread on the seventh day, even though the same God who's making the bread fall out of the sky told them there wouldn't be anything to gather. And it really seems like they're kind of missing it. And I think we today often do the same with this gift. Did you know that the keeping of the Sabbath is one of the 10 commandments? And in fact, it's the only one that we in like the Christian community today tend to think of as optional. That's really interesting to me. We don't think that now that like Jesus, has come and rescued us in his like redemptive sacrifice and rising from the dead, we don't think because of that it doesn't matter anymore whether we lie or honor our parents. But how many of us actually in our lives protect a day of rest every seventh day? I wonder, why is this commandment so hard? This should be the easy one. This is the fun one, a day off. Take a day off every week. It doesn't seem like receiving this gift should be so hard, and yet it is. I thought of maybe a couple reasons why I think it's maybe difficult for us to keep the Sabbath. For one thing, we live in just a very different culture and experience from the people who originally received this command, right? Our lives look totally different in the United States in 2024. And for one thing, we don't survive on bread that falls out of the sky. We go to grocery stores, most of us. Most of us aren't even like the people of Israel who were like shepherds and farmers. We don't subsist off the land. So even our idea of what work is really different. And so we have to figure out what it even means to contextualize this for us. What does it actually mean to keep the Sabbath today? And another reason I think it can be difficult is we're maybe wary, and I think maybe healthfully wary of legalism. By the time that Jesus came around, so many tricky rules had grown up around this practice that he had to remind the people that the Sabbath was supposed to be a gift and not a burden, right? He says to them, the Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. And we don't want to fall into the same trap, right? We don't want to become like legalists who are burdened under heavy rules. And so we do need to do some thinking about what it actually means to keep the Sabbath. What is essential to it so that we can contextualize it to our own lives. So that's really what I'm hoping to do today. I'm hoping today will feel very practical so that we can actually do this and not miss out on the gift. But before we get to the practicals, I do believe there is one more reason that most of us don't practice a keeping the regular Sabbath in our lives. And I actually think it's a bigger obstacle than the other two I mentioned. I think it's a bigger obstacle than just being confused about how or not wanting to be a legalist. I think we don't keep the Sabbath because there's always a good reason not to. There's always a good reason not to. The first time I ever tried to keep the Sabbath, actually do this in my life, I was a college student. I heard a sermon on the Sabbath, maybe similar to the one I'm doing now, preached by David Niebel, who's my coworker now, which is crazy to think about. And he said some of the things that I've already said, and I was like, this is amazing news. God has commanded me to take a day off. I'm in. I'm so in. This is great. And so that very weekend, I was like, I'm going to do this. I was a student, and so I was like, okay, I'm not going to, do homework on the Sabbath because I'm a student, so that's my work right now. And I was working as a writing tutor, and so I was like, I'm not going to do any of my work on the Sabbath. I'm just going to take the day off. This is great. And that very first weekend, because I was a writing tutor, I was sometimes assigned to, like, if people submitted things online to be reviewed, I was supposed to, like, go and make sure someone had responded to them. And I was doing that. I was assigned to do that over this weekend. So Sunday came around, and I was like, I think I got to check. I think I at least need to go make sure, that everyone that submitted a response has been responded to. That's my job. I'm supposed to do that. But I said I wouldn't work on my Sabbath. So what do I do? And all day long, I was thinking about it, which is maybe not in the spirit of Sabbath, but I was thinking about it all day. And I remember lying in bed that night, just staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep because I just kept thinking. I was arguing with the Lord now. I was like, Lord, I committed to this. This is my job, right? Don't you want me to be like a trustworthy, responsible person? Don't you want me to follow through on my commitments? I think I just have to get up and check. I'm just going to get up and check. It's no big deal. And this is what I felt like the Lord said to me. He said, Rachel, you are free. You can get up and check. Which I think is a very good place to start. We are free. But he said, but I want you to know and be honest with yourself about why. You need to know the reason is because you don't really trust me. So I went to sleep. And I woke up and it was fine. No one had submitted anything. It was fine. But here's my point. I think and maybe we, are exceptionally good at justifying our lack of trust with a lot of things that seem very moral. Follow through and scrupulousness and excellence and hard work. So when it comes to Sabbath, it's so easy to just shrug it off as unrealistic. It's not practical for me, God. But really, we just don't believe God will come through for us. We think spirituality is all well and good for certain contexts, but the real world plays by different rules. And I think this is exactly where the people of Israel found themselves in the story. Think about it. They had spent generations and generations as slaves. So they were physically set free, but their minds and hearts were still playing by old rules and living under old oppressors. So it just didn't make sense to them not to at least go out and check whether there was bread to gather on the seventh day. Like, what if it turns out there is and we miss it? What if it runs out? What if God stops giving it? It just makes sense to be prepared. It just makes sense to look out for myself and my family. We need to understand that keeping Sabbath is not actually a neutral concept. It will put you in conflict with like another way of living. In fact, it will put you in conflict with things you may not even realize are in your own heart. If you just admire it as a nice idea, you'll have no problem. But if you actually try to practice it, don't be surprised if you experience pushback. Don't be surprised if you find it confronting your own set of rules, unspoken rules for like how the world works. Rules like, I'm the one responsible to take care of me. If I don't do it, no one will. Rules like, there's only so much goodness in the world to go around. I need to do everything I can to get and protect mine. Or rules like, God helps those who help themselves. Has anyone ever heard that phrase? I love it because it's not in the Bible anywhere. And in fact, Scripture repeatedly says the opposite over and over, that God helps the weak and the vulnerable and the helpless. Or maybe it's not so much a rule as it is like an unspoken value system that elevates busyness and hard work to maybe a higher tier than they deserve. We have this funny idea that being busy equates to being moral somehow. Like people who don't know how to quit working are like more self-controlled than the rest of us. I found this quote. This is from Joseph Pieper. He was a German philosopher. And he wrote, the inmost significance of the exaggerated value which is set upon hard work appears to be this. Man seems to mistrust everything that is effortless. He can only enjoy with a good conscience what he has acquired with toil and trouble. He refuses to have anything as a gift. I think that's kind of convicting, because the Sabbath is just that, right? It's a gift. And I believe if we're really honest with ourselves in our heart of hearts, that's our main issue with it. Not that it's too hard, but that it's too easy. So I think there's maybe a moment for us to reflect on like what resistance we find ourselves feeling to keeping a Sabbath. If you don't, maybe you already do, but if you don't, what like resistance do you feel? And what do you think are the internal values or rules that resistance comes from? I think it's good for us to really be honest with ourselves about why. Because it may seem obvious, but Sabbath will only be a gift to you if you choose to receive it, right? If you say, well, it's cool, but it doesn't make sense for me, it won't ever make sense, because it only makes sense when you practice it. It only makes sense if you do it. Okay, so you're probably thinking at this point, Rachel, I get it. I would love to incorporate this into my life. I really would. It sounds great. What I would really love is a little help with the how. How actually am I, a 21st century person living in the real world, supposed to do this? And I'm really glad you asked, because sometimes I need help getting practical. A book that I read when I was preparing for this that I found really helpful was this one. It's called Keeping Sabbath Holy by Marva Dawn. And I'm not going to be able to get into most of what she says. She goes a lot further than I have time to talk about, but it was really helpful just to think about like practically how would this like work out in a real person's life. She like goes through a lot of different practices that she has for her Sabbath. So I found it really helpful if you're looking for further reading. But for today, I'm going to focus on just like 3, what I think are like the essential qualities of keeping Sabbath. Like if you don't do these, you're not really doing a Sabbath, and how they would practically look like for us. The first one, the simplest one, the first quality is ceasing. We have to cease. We have to stop. Exodus 16:29, everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out. Now, I don't think that means for us that if we're trying to keep Sabbath, we just have to like stand still, frozen in place. Don't go out. What he's saying is don't go out to gather the manna, right? Also, don't go out and check to see whether there's manna to gather, right? Just stop. That's what Sabbath literally means. It means to cease. And cease what? Cease working. In Genesis 2:2, by the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating he had done. So we cease from work. It's not just about stopping the employment of your life, like how you make money. I think that's one part of work. But it's literally ceasing from all the labor of life, from the tasks and to-do list, from the urge to be on top of things. One way that's been helpful for me to think about it is like taking your hands off the steering wheel of your life. And if that sounds a little crazy to you, like a little bit of a leap of faith, it is. It's a practical step of trust in the provision of God. And even more than that, it's an acknowledgement of the sovereignty of God. It's declaring with our lives who is really in control. And again, for some reason, it's really easy for us to like morally justify not doing this. I think it feels more than counterintuitive. It feels wrong. It feels irresponsible. Like, were you as a kid ever praised growing up for working less than other people? For not going above and beyond? Even with kids, it's so easy to praise them when they want to help, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing. One of my little brothers, Zechariah, he is very helpful, and he never wants my dad to go to the grocery store without him because he's concerned that he will forget things. Which, you know, to be fair, has happened. But I remember sometimes with Zechariah, though, I'm like, I love that you're helpful, because sometimes it can get a little concerning. And I remember one time he wanted to come along with us on something we were doing. I was driving, and I was waiting in the car, and he wasn't there yet, so I was just waiting. And then I just hear this wailing, these like sobs. I was like, oh my gosh. I got out of the car, I ran back down the hill. He was like sobbing. I thought he'd gotten hurt. I was like, what's wrong? And what had happened was he was tying his shoes and couldn't get them tied fast enough and was convinced we were just going to leave without him. So he was just sobbing, poor guy. And I remember thinking, buddy, like, it is not your job to make sure you don't get left behind. I said you could come. That's my job. Sabbath is a chance for our Father to remind us what his job is and what ours is not. It's not your job to hold your life together. It's not your job to stave off disaster. It's not your job to make sure you don't get left behind. So what would you need to cease from or stop doing in order to keep Sabbath, in order to take your hands off the steering wheel of your life? Not working, not going into work. Sometimes things aren't complicated. If you're a student, don't schedule classes and do homework. If you work from home, I don't know, close the laptop for the day. There's other ways, too, besides that I've experienced this practice of ceasing. I don't do chores or run errands on the Sabbath. It's not like a day to do the other work that I didn't get done earlier in the week. Something else I do is I turn off my phone because the Lord convicted me once about the fact that like having an endless connection to information is a way that I keep control. And so if I turn it off, it's a way that I practice God knowing how much I even need to know. So there are lots of different ways that you can cease. But again, I think you might be thinking, you know, if I were actually to do this, I would have to significantly rearrange my life. I couldn't just think about the Sabbath when it arrived. I would probably have to adjust things to prepare for it. Exactly. You're so right. And that brings me to the next quality of Sabbath keeping, which is intentionality. Intentionality. In Exodus 16:23, we see the people preparing for the Sabbath. They go out and gather twice as much the day before, and they bake and boil whatever needs to be prepared so they don't have to do it on the Sabbath. Right? They prepared for the Sabbath day to come. Now, this doesn't mean you have to finish everything you could possibly do before you're allowed to rest. There's always more work you could be doing. But it does mean like that you intentionally protect the boundaries of a Sabbath day when you keep it. So for example, if I have tasks I know need to be done by Monday morning, I do them Saturday evening. I prepare so I can keep the Sabbath free. Now, again, it's so funny to try to like walk this line. I don't want us to fall into the trap of making Sabbath a weighty, difficult thing. I do not always keep Sabbath very well. I've done things on the Sabbath that I planned not to do. The point of spiritual practices is to practice them, like you practice an instrument. So the more you do it, the more you learn to do it well. So when you hear me say intentional, I don't mean perfect, I mean deliberate. I mean, what can you intentionally choose to do to prepare your life to receive a gift of Sabbath rest? And I also know there's lots of different kinds of lives represented in this room. So I'm single and I have no children. Children still need to eat on the Sabbath day, right? They still need to be loved on the Sabbath day. And so I was talking to some of my friends who are like, have kids and families, and they shared with me how in their family they've actually sat down together to talk about what they will and won't do on their Sabbath as a family. And that makes a lot of sense because in Scripture, Sabbath was not just an individual thing, it was a community thing. People didn't just take the day off for themselves. Their servants and even animals all got a day of rest as well. It was a gift for everyone to experience together. So part of the intentionality of Sabbath also means involving others, people who are in your life. So it might mean sitting down and talking about what it looks like for you as a family, for adults and kids. It might mean explaining, like I have to do sometimes to my friends, why I'm not like reachable by phone every seventh day. So what actions could I intentionally take to prepare for the Sabbath and protect it? Or what conversations might you need to have? We want to be intentional. And we also want to be intentional about how we spend our time. We talked already about what we're not doing, right? We're not working. But then what do you do on the Sabbath? I remember someone telling me that a friend of theirs literally thought they were just supposed to like lie flat and stare at the ceiling and not do anything. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of intense. I mean, maybe for some of you that sounds nice, you know. I don't know. But there is a third and final quality of Sabbath keeping that I think helps us know what we should / can do on the Sabbath, and that is delight. I want to compare two little moments from the story of that first Sabbath that we read. In the first two verses, 16 verses 2 through 3, it says, "In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. They said, 'If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted,' when they were slaves, but they skipped that part. 'But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death.'" Well, think about that and compare it to just a few verses later in verses 17 and 18. When the Israelites go out to gather the manna, it says, "The one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone gathered as much as they needed." Look at like the difference in these two like pictures and these two mindsets. At the beginning, we have a mindset of extremes. Egypt was the place they had everything they wanted, and now God has led them into starvation. So they grumble and complain. And by contrast, in practicing Sabbath, we choose a mindset of enough. Not too much, not too little, as much as we need. And this isn't just like a grudging, fine, I guess there's enough. It's becoming aware of the rich, abundant provision of goodness and divine care that we see everywhere in our lives. Goodness we did not generate and we do not sustain. And a trust that the one who provided enough for yesterday will provide enough again tomorrow. And this awareness of enough inspires contentment and, yes, delight. I really like how the psalmist puts it in Psalm 16. He says, "The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance." In practicing the gift of the Sabbath, we accept the enoughness of our lives. That's why we can not only cease from the endless toil for more, but actually delight in what is already freely given to us. A friend of mine, Jeff Jenkins, has this saying that he started using that I've stolen because I really like it. He says, I think he learned it in like a spiritual formation class. You can ask him about it. But every once in a while, he'll just say this statement. He'll say, "There's nowhere I would rather be. There's no one I would rather be with. I will remember this moment." I love that. But it makes me realize how rarely I tend to experience my life that way. I mean, when was the last time you can honestly say you delighted in your life? The last time you can say you delighted in your life. By giving us this seventh day of rest, God invites us to remember that what is true about Sabbath is true about life in general. It is not a burden, not a battle, not a series of tasks to be completed. It is a gift to be delighted in. And so there's lots of ways, I think, on the Sabbath we can practice delight. Thankfulness, just naming things that I'm thankful for, noticing and naming the goodness in my life. Something that's helpful for me is to look at things that are beautiful, to listen to things that are beautiful. I really like poetry. Maybe not everyone here can relate to that. But Poetry to me actually has a lot of qualities that I think it actually shares with the Sabbath. It's a genre of writing that's not practical. And so it actually helps me, I think, like enter into the spirit of Sabbath. I do sometimes watch TV on the Sabbath. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But what I would say is I try to avoid things that are just distracting. Distracting and delight are not the same. But anything that helps you delight in your life, that's beautiful, that is good, that you can thank God for, is a thing to do on the Sabbath. And obviously, all of these things ultimately lead us to worship. Right? We're led from delight in the gifts that God gives us to worship of the giver. But I think in this area of delight, what the Sabbath really challenges in us is this attitude that delight is somehow unspiritual or less spiritual than hard work and toil. You remember I told that story about Margaret and my mom at the beginning when Margaret was trying to give my mom a gift. My mom is an amazing mom. And her mistake in that moment wasn't that she was being a bad mom. She was trying really, really hard to be a good one. She was caught up in the hard work of parenting, and she assumed that Margaret was trying to get her attention because she needed something else from her, when all my sister really needed was for her mom to enjoy something she had made for her. So why would we think God is more pleased with us when we are unable or unwilling to enjoy the gifts he has given us? There is certainly a place in our walk with Jesus for self-denial and self-control, right? I'm not advocating like reckless, unrestricted, just go out and do whatever you want. But we are not more righteous for enjoying our lives less. And the Sabbath is proof of it. So, what should you do on your Sabbath? Whatever reminds you to delight in the gift of your life. Whatever reminds you to delight in the gift of your life. As we close, I'm going to go ahead and invite the worship team back up. Most of what I have said today, I realize I've been like addressing people who like already follow Jesus and like want to incorporate these practices into their lives. So if you don't consider yourself a Christian, it might have been a little confusing. Like, what is the whole point of the Sabbath? And I've referred a few times to the practice of keeping the Sabbath. We call this a spiritual practice, which I think begs the question, practice for what? Like, what are we practicing for exactly? I think we're practicing eternity. Sabbath is practicing what it means to live in the reality of Jesus' kingdom come. It is coming, but it's also here. It's entering into the life that is fully life. This Jewish writer that I read, Abraham Heschel, he describes Sabbath as the taste of eternity. And that is the gift of Sabbath that we're offered, the taste of eternity in this present moment. So if you don't follow Jesus, or if you're trying to understand like what Christians think God is like and what he wants for humans, Sabbath is what God wants for humans. To God, you are not a tool, and your purpose is not work. You are a beloved child, and your purpose is delight. He did not make you to use you. He made you to bless you. And for those of us who do follow Jesus, I will just say, let's take the gift. Don't miss it. No matter how harried or frantic you feel like your life is, in fact, the more harried and frantic you feel like your life is, the gift of Sabbath is for you. And if you already have this practice in your life, I hope that for you, this morning has been what it was for me, which was a really healthy and helpful reminder of the heart of this, what it really is about, what I am meant to learn by keeping the Sabbath. For now, we're going to continue to practice this Sabbath day by singing some songs of worship, songs that invite us to rest and trust and delight in our God. can't think of a better way to spend these next few minutes. And so, Lord Jesus, as we do, pray that whether we came here prepared to enter your rest or not, we would know that it is offered to us. That we have an opportunity now to just be in your presence, to lay down work, toil, effort, and striving, to lay aside anxiety and stress and the never-ending pressures of life, and to trust that all that really matters, you made, you sustain, and you freely give us. Thank you, Jesus, for this morning. Pray that you would help us to enter into your rest today. Amen.
Thanks for listening. For more info, visit hcbellingham.com and join us any Sunday, 9 and 11 a.m.